All right. Welcome to my big project. This is going to be my huge project here that I decided to take up because it has given me a lot of thought, and because of my own interest in psychoanalysis and also my peaking interest into the political arena and fascism, I thought this would be a good text to really challenge my limits of understanding and explaining. So if we want to, I'm a little hesitant to call this a class, but maybe this preface will, who knows? I'm not really sure how I want to make it. I don't know if I want to make it into a class or just make it in a sort of thing where I just tackle the summaries and do my best to sort of just teach what Deleuze and Guattari are really trying to express here in Anti-Oedipus. So moving forward, the beginning of Anti-Oedipus starts with a preface by Michel Foucault. And he begins to paint the political arena from 1945 to 1965, right? And just to kind of give you the train of thought, the discourse that was dominant during that time, at least this is what Michel Foucault thinks is dominant, right? He thinks Marx was dominant, Freud was dominant, and the notion of sign systems, the signifier. Foucault feels that this was the very measure and the three requirements that people were using to sort of be a measure of truth about the time and ourselves. And then Foucault goes into this dualism, that Europe has fallen into some dominant dualism between social exploitation and psychic repression. So this really shows you the systems of Marx and Freud here, where Marx is really focusing on social exploitation, and Freud is more about the unconscious, the psychic repression, Oedipus, the triangulation of Oedipus. But the thing about the problem with this, that Foucault feels like that the problem with this is that clearly maybe these old banners, right? I guess maybe it's better to say old models are just sort of not good enough anymore. Maybe these old models don't really explain what is really happening. It doesn't really explain the movements that are going on. It doesn't explain the experience. And just to kind of quote Foucault here, he says, "It is true that the old banners were raised, but the combat shifted and spread into new zones. He says, Anti-Oedipus shows, first of all, how much ground has been covered. But it is more than that. It wastes no time in discrediting the old idols. Even though it does have a great deal of fun with Freud, most important, it motivates us to go further. So it seems that Foucault's understanding and reading of Deleuze and Guattari's work on Anti-Oedipus is kind of resembling this. We need to go beyond these old models, because it seems that these old models are not covering the movements of territory that we are now in. And this is important. You know, we need to know how to proceed. Now, right from the start, Foucault expresses that he doesn't want Anti-Oedipus to, he thinks it would be a mistake to read Anti-Oedipus as a kind of a totalizing theory to save our times and, you know, you could say, get us back on track and bring back hope. So I think Foucault's points about the misreadings that are possible in Anti-Oedipus, I think maybe these are things that we should maybe keep in mind as we decide to kind of dive into Anti-Oedipus, which is a difficult work, in my opinion, to express and to break down into digestible material. But I think this work will be, me pursuing this project will be very pivotal to reflecting back on how we look at our times now, at, you know, coronavirus, vaccinations, fascism, which will be addressed pretty soon right now. And so Foucault also wants us to not look at this as a philosophy, right? There's already enough philosophy, but more as a erotic art. But I think I want to contextualize this erotic art here, because what we might not know of Deleuze and Guattari is that they also really liked Nietzsche. And Nietzsche would, I believe, I forget which text it is. I want to say it's in, it's either in Zarathustra or or Beyond Good and Evil. I want to say it's probably Beyond Good and Evil. I could be wrong. It's either one of those two texts where Nietzsche talks about that we need to create the beautiful and not have some kind of resentment for the ugly, right? This sort of, when Nietzsche quotes himself saying in Zarathustra, my only negation will be looking away, right? So it's not paying attention to the ugly, but to create the beautiful. And I think when Foucault is talking about Deleuze and Guattari's work about Anti-Oedipus, it should be perceived as this, as them attempting to bring something beautiful into the mix, of all this philosophy, all this, fascism at the time, and the dominant theories that were controlling the political arena. And the third point is that this book is maybe not meant to answer why, but with how to proceed. I think that's a very, I feel like that's a very weird thing there. I feel like that's a weird statement, because it's like, typically people want to know why, so then they can proceed. But it's like, now he's trying to say, no, let's not try to answer why, but let's just figure out with how to proceed. But I think myself, maybe someone can, maybe this is where I'm getting too philosophical here, right? Where it needs to be read like in art, because I think the art wouldn't tell you why, but it kind of tells you how, in a very strange way, right? So I think there's the connection with that, but logically, I just couldn't understand, like, how do I proceed with something and then not know the why? I feel like many of us would be like, I need to know the why, so then I can know how to proceed. But maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe someone can clarify that for me in the comments. But I think I think probably the answer is within the idea that it should be read as not as a philosophy, but as some kind of artwork. So what are the hows that Deleuze and Guattari are going to try to answer, right? For example, how does one introduce desire into thought, into discourse, into action? How can and must desire deploy its forces within the political domain and grow more intense in the process of overturning the established order? Right? These are straight quotes, straight questions that Foucault presses upon us, that he feels that Deleuze and Guattari are going to try to answer. Right? How does this desire process filter into our action? And how can we use desire as a political tool, I think, right? To tackle the orders, maybe the oppressive orders, oppressive structures that are against us. And Foucault then follows it up with that there are three adversaries, right? Three opponents that Deleuze and Guattari are going to kind of battle with, right? Have some kind of confrontation with. But Foucault makes sure to let us know that the first two, the political aesthetics and the technicians of desire, these are more tactical confrontations, right? These are just more tactical, not really sort of a war against them. Some examples that Foucault give here to kind of give you what's been going on is that like the sad militants, terrorists of theory, basically anybody that wants to preserve the political order and the discourse. And then there's the technicians of desire, like the psychoanalysts and the semiologists, where it's they're against this twofold structure of lack and law, which is also structure. So lack and structure, right? This is something that they're going to critique Deleuze and Guattari. And the major enemy, the big one, the giant in the room, the elephant in the room here, is fascism. But it's not just the historical fascism, right? Like Hitler and Mussolini. It's the fascism in all of us. And I recently heard a critique about this, right? It can't possibly, now some of us might feel a little bit ambivalent about how is there a sort of fascism in all of us? What are Deleuze and Guattari talking about? And what is Foucault talking about? Well, Foucault would say the fascism in us, and I think Deleuze and Guattari would also agree with this, is that it is our innate love for power, or you could say desire for power. That is what they define as the fascism in us, and how we should combat that, and all the forms that it takes. Because if we have a desire for power, clearly it can take all sorts of unknown and various forms. And we need to be aware of this. And this is, again, this is the major enemy for Deleuze and Guattari. At least this is how Michel Foucault paints it. Now, here Foucault does deviate, and he admits it. He says, and I'll quote him straight here. He says, "I would say that Anti-Oedipus, may its authors forgive me, is a book of ethics. The first book of ethics to be written in France in quite a long time. Perhaps that explains why its success was not limited to a particular quote, quote, readership. Being anti-Oedipal has become a lifestyle, a way of thinking and living." So Foucault goes on to say that he believes that Anti-Oedipus can be looked as a kind of non-fascist life manual. And, you know, actually he literally, he says, an introduction to the non-fascist life. That's what Foucault would call it. And if we can read Anti-Oedipus as a manual against fascism, which I believe this is very pertinent. Maybe there are some gold gems that we can take from Anti-Oedipus, or some, you know, deep reflections about the, you know, the so-called fascism of today. And is it really true that there is some kind of desire of power within all of us, and that we need to be wary of this, and that it isn't just the label of fascism that we throw around, but it is also the sort of inherent desire for power that is fascistic in all of us. And I think this text is going to be really good, really pivotal, and maybe causing a lot of reflections for today in our times, and maybe it will make us think about how we can transform that desire into different avenues. So to continue on, Foucault, and this is literally like copy and paste from the text itself, because I feel like the points that Foucault is making here are very strong, and I felt like if I were to summarize them, it would not have the sort of explanatory power that is needed to understand that these are very important points. I feel like that Foucault is really trying to express, and how this book, Anti-Oedipus, can be seen as a book of ethics, a non-fascist life manual. And to proceed from there, he says, to free political action from all unitary and totalizing paranoia. You know, the first thing I think about is vaccinations, COVID, how that's all manifesting, right? Whether you feel like it's people that are being paranoia about COVID or people being paranoid about vaccinations. I think that's something worth thinking about. Now, develop action, thought, and desires by proliferation, juxtaposition, and disjunction, and not by subdivision and hierarchy, the pyramid scheme of hierarchy. I think that is interesting to think about, how we typically develop action by doing a kind of division and going through a pyramid scheme of hierarchy. So I feel like that is interesting. And then Foucault says, withdraw allegiance from the old categories of the negative, law, limit, castration, lack, lacuna, which Western thought has so long held sacred as a form of power and an access to reality. There's something to think about with that, because power, a lot, and this is what my thought has been conflicted with lately, is law, lack, right? Desire as a sort of lack, and how we always experientially feel like we're lacking something, and that there's limits, and especially how our modern Western world is very formed by access. I just think about it, access, Facebook, how Facebook will deny your access if you say the wrong things, right? There's a form of power, literally limiting you. They are like playing as the law. Things to think about there, a lot of things. Now, Foucault says, but prefer what is positive and multiple. Difference over uniformity. That's interesting, because it almost feels like the way we have embraced difference today actually is more like a uniformity rather than a difference. You know what I mean? I'll continue on. So flows over unities, mobile arrangements over system. That's interesting as well. Believe that what is productive is not sedentary, but nomadic. This constant movements that we should kind of look towards to, and not systems. Foucault then proceeds with saying, do not think that one has to be sad in order to be militant, even though the thing one fighting is abominable. It's the connection from desire to reality that matters. That matters. I've seen this with a lot of people as well, where maybe you could call this a sort of pessimism or depressive attitudes, right? But they're saying that this attitude doesn't have to be necessary. You don't have to be pessimistic. You don't have to be so disgruntled all the time. But just think about, even though the things that are going on in our reality, maybe you do perceive them as unbearable and abominable, but think about, how do we connect our desire to reality? That is what will be more of the militant way, the more revolutionary desire. How do we connect our desire to reality? I think that's a really good question. Okay, so do not use thought to ground a political practice in truth, nor political action to discredit as mere speculation a line of thought. Use political practice as an intensifier of thought and an analysis as a multiplier of the forms and domains for the intervention of political action. I'm going to read this because this line hit me right here. Nor political action to discredit as mere speculation a line of thought. We do that all the time, don't we? We do that all the time. That we take, I mean, this is riddled in our political arena today, where there's all sorts of political actions that we do to belittle the line of thought that is arising, right? We say it's just mere speculation. I think one example would be maybe, I think, well, one controversial example is the FDA, right? Now that the FDA has approved the vaccine, now people say, well, I don't trust the FDA, right? It's gone that way. And I feel like that's interesting, right? And then they're also saying, do not use thought to ground a political practice in truth. I think that's something that I will have to, really dwell upon too, right? Do not use thought to ground a political practice in truth. I think they're really going for a type of movement here. They want a movement, right? Like sort of always shifting movement. Don't have static thoughts and think it's the truth with the big T. Okay. Now, the last section, the last bit of the points that Foucault makes is do not demand of politics that it restores the rights of the individual as philosophy has defined them. The individual is the product of power. What is needed is to de-individualize by means of multiplication and displacement, diverse combinations. The group must not be the organic bond uniting hierarchized individuals, but a constant generator of de-individualization. A couple thoughts here that I'm a little concerned with in terms of the way they look at individuality. And the reason why I'm expressing this concern is because if people ever get a chance to read Carl Jung makes a distinction between individualism and what he would call to individuate. But I feel that what Foucault is critiquing here is not Carl Jung's notion of to individuate, but rather individualism. And I think Foucault may be correct in this. A lot of people talk about their rights, which is a dominant, discourse going on. But he's saying that the individual is the product of power and that we need to de-individualize. Now, I wonder how that's going to look like by multiplication and displacement, the diverse combinations. That's interesting. And here's the wariness of this, but we need to be a constant generator of de individualization. Because remember, if we are accepting Foucault's premises that the individual is the product of power, that means this is the fascism that is in all of us, and that we have to constantly be aware and constantly fighting to de-individuate ourselves and each other, so that fascism does not rise once again, or fascism does not take another form, another various form that maybe we're not aware of. And the last point, do not become enamored of power. I think that is a very simple point, but it's a good point. It's a good point to think about. As much as we maybe feel bitter about repression and the denial of our rights, and I think a good question to ask ourselves is this also a unconscious excuse for me to become enamored for power, for me to take over? That is something that is definitely, I would say, if you didn't take anything out of this summary, out of this reflection, this talk, I would say this would be the last point to think about. When I complain about my rights, when I complain about being oppressed, being in some kind of repression, is it possible that I am doing some kind of double bind, right? Where I'm doing like a kind of double speak here, where actually it's my excuse because I want power. Actually, I don't think the term excuse is good, but what I'm saying is that it could be my unconscious motivation for power. I think that's a better way of putting it. My unconscious motivation for power, my secret love for power. And then I will sort of end this with the last paragraph that Foucault leaves us off with. He says, "It could even be said that Deleuze and Guattari care so little for power that they have tried to neutralize the effects of power linked to their own discourse. Hence, the games and snares scattered throughout the book, rendering its translation a feat of real prowess. But these are not the familiar traps of rhetoric. The latter work to sway the reader without his being aware of the manipulation, and ultimately win him over against his will. The traps of Anti-Oedipus are those of humor. So many invitations to let oneself be put out, to take one's leave of the text and slam the door shut. The book often leads one to believe it is all fun and games when something essential is taking place, something of extreme seriousness, the tracking down of all varieties of fascism, from the enormous ones that surround and crush us to the petty ones that constitute the tyrannical bitterness of our everyday lives." That's good, because it's funny that Foucault described it that way. And just to kind of give you guys a future glimpse of his text, if you haven't read it, the language is crazy. It's so alienating and bizarre, and pardon my words here, schizophrenic, as they will like to capitalize on, that it is something that you will want to take leave of. I remember, beginning to read this, and I'm like, I just wanted to drop it because it's a very difficult text. But again, I do agree with Foucault that there is a sort of a seriousness here that really wants to tackle what Foucault says, the varieties of fascism. right? Down from the big noticeable versions of fascism all the way down to our secret desire for power, a secret love of power. Okay. Hopefully, maybe I can do this as a weekly, a weekly series, maybe bi-weekly. I'll see how I want to do this, but I think max bi-weekly. But if you guys enjoyed this, or maybe I messed up, explained some things incorrectly, go ahead and share them in the comments or message me personally. I have no problem. I'm always willing to expand and educate myself and educate you guys. So, all right, that will be basically the end of the class.